What's up, everybody? Welcome in. Celtics Beat on the day after, at least as we sit here and record this, maybe when you listen to it as well, the day after the Boston Celtics and the NBA have released the schedules for the upcoming season. No, this will not be a full-on schedule release show because those drive me crazy and I just don't find them that interesting. But we will touch on aspects of it, obviously, and give you some of the highlights. As I mentioned off the top, Adam Kaufman, Evan Valenti, Mark Murphy here with us. Mark, you know, I hopefully your summer's been going great and everything like that, but I didn't realize quite how long it had been since we'd had you on the show here with us until I went back, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff on iTunes, folks. I went on iTunes, I looked up Celtics Beat, and I searched for your name, and episode 458, mind you, what did I say? This is 474, episode 458. April 29th, 2022, with the headline of the show. I know, it feels like yesterday. Yep. Should the Celtics be the favorites in the Eastern Conference? What do you think, Mark? Should they have been the favorites in the Eastern Conference?
They certainly play that way. I mean, now you look at some of the lines out there, they're the favorite to win the NBA titles.
That's right.
Can we break this down for a second real quick? Just because like this show sometimes can be, in terms of like getting snake bit by news. Mm-hmm. Adam, we've discussed this consistently on this show, how this particular show gets snake bit by news. Like,
well, the last one was Ian Thompson. What was it, like 7 seconds after the show?
Right after the show got done, Bill Russell's number is being retired league wide. I mean, like 10 seconds after I pressed stop. Like, it was unbelievable. Yeah. So we often talk about that in the show, but this particular thing, we were prescient for once, Adam. We were right on the money about should the Celtics be Eastern Conference favorites with Mark. I mean, they represented the Eastern Conference NBA Finals, and now they're the NBA title favorites as we head into the new season. So, I mean, look, folks, Celtics Beat's got you covered. That's my only point here. And I only bring this up because the last time we were really prescient about something, and we got a lot of feedback, negative feedback for this, and I keep on hammering this point. When we had Dr. P on to talk about Kyrie's knee,
that's right.
Everybody gave us a hard time that Dr. P did not give a rosy prognosis for Kyrie and his knee injury. And people were like, oh, that guy's know what he's talking about. He has no clue, whatever. Guess what? We were right on the money about Kyrie's knee. So, folks, just understand here, this show has a couple of things going for it. One of it is just we're very prescient because we have the best guests of anybody around, including Mark, obviously, who's here.
Well, look, we do like to harken back to the seal and correct example, but the fact of the matter is I don't even need to be humble about this, Mark, and much of the credit is to that of the guests like yourself. So when I say I'm not being humble, I'm not even talking about me. I'm talking about humble on behalf of the show and everyone who is part of it on a weekly basis. Fact of the matter is we've been doing this show for years and we're ahead of the curve. All the other podcasts, the talk radio shows, TV talking heads, if you want your Celtics analysis, folks, like this is the show that you come to find out what's going to happen because we almost never miss. It's just a fact. We are we've got the receipts, man.
You guys probably get more writers than anybody, don't you?
Oh, by a long shot. Yeah, absolutely. And look, that where I'll scale back on that is, you know, maybe that's just a choice. Like some podcasts, and there are a lot of great Celtics podcasts out there. Some of them, you know, prefer to do it like just their hosts or a consistent co-host or, you know, it's whatever. Like Evan and I could do the show every week by ourselves and it would be fine. But, you know, to take it to the level that we want it to be at, we have people like you and Ian and Bull Pett and, you know, on and on and on and former players and coaches and everything on a weekly basis. That's what puts Celtics Beat in the place that it is. And we get the thousands of listeners that we get every single week doing the show only once a week, you know, so we, you know, it's a quick mid-August thank you to all of you out there listening, because if you disagree with anything that I'm saying right now, you're either hate listening or you know, you're not listening because you don't feel that way about this show. So either way, I'm feeling good.
I just want to make a pact before we finish the show. We should all give one, like some sort of take, and one of these will hit. Like we got to give a strong, just because of Mark and his.
I mean, is it a strong take to say the Celtics are not going to trade for Kevin Durant? Because that's what I've been saying for weeks.
I mean, I don't think that's hot enough at this point. I think at the signs all point that direction, even though the Celtics are the unofficial leaders in the clubhouse, apparently, for that particular.
Yeah.
What does that mean, Mark? What is to you? What does the unofficial leader in the clubhouse mean? What is that?
Yeah, how many leaders in the clubhouse make it to the end? It's
true.
it just yeah. Okay, here's a hot take. The Nets win the Eastern Conference.
Oh,
So
all
the
right.
title of this
They
one
decide, they
gonna be-
come back. Kyrie has to prove himself. Ben Simmons has to prove himself. Kevin Durant finally gets the support he deserves, and Joe Harris comes back, and
Sure.
they actually win the conference.
It is sort of funny when you think about it. Like if they all come back, like everyone that you just outlined, like nobody's traded away. Kyrie's not traded. Durant obviously isn't traded. Simmons actually plays. Harris is healthy. All these things come to pass, which is not a long shot by any stretch. Like that's the direction that we're heading. If all of that stuff actually happens, like it shouldn't be a hot take to say, hey, the Nets are going to win the Eastern Conference, but it feels like one, Mark,
Sure.
because there's such a sort of forgotten team right now because everyone just looks at them as a team in disarray. Like we're sitting here on, in mid-August wondering again, like the Celtics begin the season. Opening night is October 16th or 18th rather. And we'll talk about some of that stuff in a little bit. So that's, a couple months away, not even at this point. And we're sitting here wondering, is Kevin Durant going to be a Net? Is Kyrie Irving definitely going to be a Net? Is Ben Simmons going to play for the Nets? Will Steve Nash be coaching the Nets? Will Sean Marks be the GM of the Nets? People are just looking at this as a giant dumpster fire waiting to, just kindling.
Yeah. And, Joe Tsai told Durant to go stuff it and he won't fire management.
Yeah.
So you get that too. But I really think there's a chance there for a real spark.
So we've been, getting people's opinions over the last several weeks on this issue, and we don't need to rehash ours because we've done so much of that. But your belief is this is not going to happen. This is the Kevin Durant to Boston. This is
I don't think so. I mean, I think you would have seen Marks drop his price by now if he was really serious about it. The latest reports out of there are that now they want to try and run it forward. And I think, and it maybe then he'll get his price, but it's maybe I'm sounding totally unrealistic with this, but if you're talking a Kevin Durant, Jaylen Brown trade, that's a straight up trade.
Well, which you can't
because of the age involved.
Yeah.
I mean, plus the defensive player of the year, plus picks. I just it's not a realistic situation. The Celtics aren't going to make a deal. No, yeah. His Achilles. That's a tough one. Larry Bird had one of those late in his career.
Well, I'm of the mind too that, and again, I've made this case, so I won't harp, but just to throw it out there, I'm of the mind that if you give up what it would take to get Kevin Durant based on the asking price that we know or assume right now, I just don't think if you're the Celtics, you're all that much better. Like you're more top heavy. Like obviously Tatum and Durant would be a thrill to watch together if everybody's healthy and everything. And they were just, on Instagram working out together in Los Angeles. So that's fanning that flame a little bit. But I just don't think you're that much better a team because you're sacrificing the depth and potentially the defensive identity that got you to the finals in the first place. And now you're that much deeper, obviously, after signing Brogdon, after signing Gallinari. But let's do this, the three of us, because Evan, we haven't done this on previous shows. We've broken down the whole, will they, won't they, should they, shouldn't they? How about what do people want? And what I mean by that is if you're, and we'll go category by category. Let's start with the coaches. If you're Ime Udoka, Mark, what do you want? Do you want Kevin Durant, who you have a relationship with, you've worked with in the past in Brooklyn, or do you want your roster, which is a championship favorite on paper right now as it's constituted, that you're very familiar with, that you coached to the finals last year and you went out and you added pieces? You want door A or door B?
He wants guys who can run for a long time, and I think he'll take youth over even Kevin Durant at that point. with Jaylen Brown. I think Jaylen has the potential to be a terrific defensive player. I think he may, not wanting to disrupt what he achieved defensively, I think he wants to move forward with what he's got. I mean, sure, he'd take Kevin Durant, but not at the expense of Jaylen Brown.
What do you think, Ev?
Marcus? Well, I mean, every coach wants Kevin Durant. I mean, like that. I said this like at the time, like as a Nats fan, if you're a fan of the Washington Nationals, like you own a franchise to somehow luck into a player as good as Juan Soto, and then like you trade him away when he's 23 years old. It just would bother me, right? You want to have at some point in your life a Juan Soto. If you are a franchise of any, whether if you're a bottom franchise or the Celtics or anything, you want a guy like Kevin Durant at some point in the lifespan of your history, right?
Sure.
But
ideally back in 2016 when he was
right.
flirting with different teams, not 6 years later.
To Mark's point, I just really think that this team, and I think I could be wrong here. I think our buddy Dan Greenberg tweeted this out, where I think Wick might have spoke to 98.5 about how
an interview with WBZ TV.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. So, and maybe he talked about how, you know, how the front office loves this team, like Brad loves this team, Ime loves this team as it currently sits right now. And I don't have any trouble believing that at all whatsoever. It seems like to me, Brad and Ime have a very similar vision for what this team needs to look like. It helps that Brad coached this team very recently and has a kind of a really interesting perspective on how this team should be built. It just seems to me if Ime, as we all believed last offseason when we were talking about, oh yeah, well, this team at least will be better defensively. You know, we'll see how the offense goes, but this will be a defensive first team. Well, they just went out and added like Malcolm Brogdon. And that's going to make their biggest strength even stronger. That defensive backcourt of Smart, White, Brown, and now Malcolm Brogdon is such an embarrassment of riches. But if you look at what just happened in the finals, and it just seemed like everybody wore down, this team is now specially built to weather that storm of the marathon regular season. If we want to segue this into the, right into the schedule talk. It seems
well, I want to do a few different categories before we get to the schedule stuff. So let's stick with the coaching staff.
But I got to assume that Ime having all these interchangeable defensive parts is exactly what you're looking for. And now I'm not saying that Durant doesn't also bring versatility defensively. Durant would be walking onto the best defensive team he's ever been on probably in his entire life, and has the ability to guard up and down a little bit. But that's one guy versus having, 2 or 3 guys that can do that. And you'd rather have more bodies because guys get hurt. So I think, again, we're projecting here on Ime.
Yeah. That's the whole point.
I think we all know him a little bit. I think he would take this team no problem. I think they're all on the same page about it.
So let's keep projecting. Let's project upon the players. If your players on this team, and not guys that would theoretically be part of the deal, like obviously Marcus Smart doesn't want to go anywhere, Derek White doesn't want to go anywhere, and people have all sorts of different theories about, Jaylen Brown and how he views his future. But let's say you're someone like Jason Tatum. You're the head of the snake, you're the star of the team, you're the all-star, you're all NBA, you're, a guy who's going to have his number in the rafters one day. He wants a ring. Obviously, he wants a ring, and obviously he has relationships with both of these guys that go back years. If you're Jason Tatum, Mark, and you're fixated on just winning that championship above all else, are you looking at it and saying, man, like being alongside Kevin Durant for a full regular season into the playoffs, like I could sign up for that. Yeah, like that'll get me toward a title a little bit faster. Give me that option. We'll sacrifice a little depth, whatever, we'll figure it out. Or is there, not just a part of him, because I'm sure there is, but a significant part of him that says, all these years of people counting out Jaylen and I, we can do this. We've shown we can do this. Now we just got to get over the hump. We got to keep climbing. We're going to do this together. We're going to show everybody. We're going to have the last laugh. And I do want all that depth and everything that we already talked about. If you're Tatum and you're the one that actually gets to make that decision versus Brad Stevens, Mike Zarin, and the rest of the crew there, which do you want? Do you want Kevin Durant or do you want Jaylen Brown?
I think the one thing that Tatum has been really good at is skating right down the middle on that issue.
To a fault, I think, actually. But keep going.
but to the point where I think he's actually a little dispassionate about that. Yeah, he's great friends with Durant, and he's basically grown up with Jaylen. I think he'll take either. I think he's just focused on his own game, on, and like that or not, I mean, I think he's a very objective thinker. And I think he'll take either. I don't think he leans either way.
Yeah, but the one thing I'll point out is that when he spoke, and Adam, you and I went back and forth on this, how he felt about this particular press conference, or not even a press conference, he just was hanging around at the Point Gods, I think, event that Showtime put on, and people had cameras and microphones everywhere, so they asked him a few questions. He did talk about chemistry and how important that is. Now, he has chemistry with both guys, obviously, but he clearly has more chemistry with one guy than the other guy. So again, we're projecting here. I think Tatum would prefer, maybe it's an ego thing, but to be the number one guy in a championship team is a little different than riding with Kevin Durant. So
Okay.
I think maybe that's something to consider here. I mean, the beauty of Tatum is he's kind of like the ideal guy you want in your locker room, because he just really doesn't make a lot of noise at all whatsoever, just goes out and does his thing. And maybe the lack of, I guess the lack of communication, like as like a guy who's always in front of a camera with a microphone saying stuff, like maybe that bothers people. But I kind of really enjoy the fact that, like, no, Tatum's all about ball. He doesn't really care about answering questions all the time, and just tries to be, as Mark said, as steady down the middle as he possibly can, and just focus on basketball as much as he can. Like, nobody compares to Tim Duncan in that particular regard, but I would say he feels, Tim Duncan-ish in that particular regard. So,
Well, although what I'll say, like, Tim Duncan never said anything ever to anybody.
that's fair.
What's interesting
Except
about
to a ref
Tatum,
on the sideline.
Except Joey Crawford.
Yeah.
yeah, well, yeah, of course.
Heat up.
What's interesting about Tatum, though, is that, over the years, and certainly over the last year or so, he's given you so much more, especially if you put him in a setting like, the JJ Redick podcast or something like that. If he's in a very comfortable environment, like you would be with a former longtime NBA player as well, versus sitting here doing an interview with the three of us or something like that, he's opening up quite a bit more. He's offering a lot more than he ever did before. And I think if he doesn't always spell it out, sometimes you have to read between the lines a little bit and really listen to what he's saying. But I do think, Mark, that that's why I guess I find it noteworthy when on an issue like this, he does so carefully skate the lane. Like that first multiple things went through my mind in that Showtime presser with cameras shoved in his faces. On the one hand, I was a little disappointed that he was, and again, it was how he was answering the specific questions he was asked, but he was kind of talking up Kevin Durant, great player, played with him at the Olympics and yada, yada, yada. Didn't really say anything about Jaylen. And I was like, well, does that mean anything? But then I started, sort of the more rational part of my mind, I started thinking, this guy has had to defend his relationship with Jaylen Brown for years. Like, he's probably just done. Like, if we don't know how he feels about Jaylen by now, like, that's our problem. You know what I mean? So, so I think that's a part of it as well.
Yeah, he answered that question throughout the finals.
Right.
I mean, I mean,
over and over and over.
Yeah, sure. People know where he stands. I mean, but he's probably even more inclined than a lot of guys in the league to say it's a business. It's a business answer that usually comes for this stuff, and he'll go to that quickly.
Now, what about, just to give you a third category here, what about, we sort of mixed front office into coaching staff with Ime. What about ownership? Wick Grossbeck, to Evan's point, has talked about how he really likes this group. And what else is he going to say? Because I do really believe he believes that. Why wouldn't you? You just got to Game 6 of the NBA Finals, and now you're better right now than you were at that point in time entering the new season. You're the betting favorite going into the year, as you outlined before, Mark. So obviously he does and should feel good about this group. But sort of taking that to the next stage, he certainly has some level of say. He get a final say if he wants it. I don't know if he does, or if he just defers and trusts trusts his basketball operations group, but he certainly could, like, he could slide in and say, Brad, like, enough's enough. I don't want Kevin Durant. I want Jaylen. Let's keep building with what we're building. Or he could let this fester. He could let this go on because maybe he is intrigued by what Kevin Durant would look like in a Celtics uniform, like everybody was 6 years ago when he opted to go to Golden State after the meeting in the Hamptons. What do you think ownership would prefer if it had or elected to have the final call here?
I think they love the idea that this is a team that they've grown, and you're going to trade your greatest piece. No, I think it's. I think he'd like to see what he has. I think he'd like to see what he has here.
Well, I think the idea is to be Golden State and to try and have a young, long window of contention. Now, obviously, nobody's going to be Golden State and win that many titles, right? It takes a little bit of luck in that regard. It takes the cap jumping up a ginormous amount and signing Kevin Durant, speaking of whom, to a contract, bringing him in and making life hell for every other team in basketball. But the idea is to be having a long, sustained run of success, and Kevin Durant's age hinders that. So I think if it were up to Wick, this would be the team he would want, or the ownership would want, because of how long the Boston will be hanging around. I mean, you have to remember, the window opened, Tatum's rookie year. So they've been going from then till now, and they've had some, roller coaster up and downs in between, and so has the NBA. But, here we are a few years later, and Boston is actually kind of right where we thought they'd be, at a front runner in the Eastern Conference and a front runner for the NBA title. So, it might not have been the ideal journey to get to where they are, but this is exactly where they want to be right now. And I think, given the fact that they've accomplished so much with this crew, I think it's like, well, if we're already here, again, development, as we say all the time, development isn't linear here. It takes, up and down, and it's a roller coaster, but things are looking great. And if you're Wick, it's like, well, this is, again, things will get more expensive as we continue to go here. The cap will continue to go up, but at that rate, as you've seen Golden State kind of like boast about all the time, like, yeah, we don't care about money, like whatever that tax bill is going to be, whatever we care about right now, we'll pay that, we'll pay it all now, and we'll recoup all that money later, and then we'll do this again, hopefully. So again, I think if Wick, again, we're projecting, but I think he'd prefer this crew too, which is crazy, because now are we all 3 for 3 on they all want to have the same team they have right now? Adam, is that your point?
That's basically my point. It's a whatever 20-minute version to get to my point, but yeah, I think that is my point. I just think that they like what they've got and they believe in what they're building, and they're not going to overpay to overhaul things, but I just don't even, like, to Mark's point, if it were even possible, and it's not, but if it were even contractually possible to just do a 1-for-1 Kevin Durant for Jaylen Brown, would they do it? More than likely. But I still think they'd second guess it internally quite a bit before. So I think they would have major qualms about it, given injury history and the 8-year gap between the two, and one's still very much on the ascent and adding new things to his game every single offseason, versus the other that's not quite on the decline yet, but isn't far from it. Like, this isn't easy, which is why, to me, it is easy to not make a trade that involves multiple starters and a billion picks or pick swaps or some combination. The whole thing for me from the beginning has been asinine, Mark. And I've made that abundantly clear in past shows, but I think there is a reason. Like, just a couple of days ago, Adam Himmelsbach of the Globe, the most recent report on this whole thing was the season nets aren't close to a deal, and there have been no discussions of substance. And none of that surprises me at all.
No. And, to go back to Wick and Pagliuca and all of them, you got Durant's reputation with contracts. I mean, when is his option? That's slipping my mind at the moment. Is it another 2 years?
I'd have to double check.
Yeah, but he's been known to. He's left everywhere he's gone. Are you going to trade a guy who's such a big part of your future? And you're going to have to pay Jaylen, obviously.
Yeah.
But you run the risk of Durant just taking off again.
Yeah, and I've said that I don't know how many times in the past that I just don't trust him. I don't trust, like, I mean, if he were true to his word, so to speak, he'd still be running out the clock in Brooklyn. He wouldn't be looking, trying to force his way out right now because he is under contract, and he's under contract for the whatever the option, I'm not sure, but he is under contract for the next 4 years.
No
And
option.
no option. Straight up, he's under contract for the next 4 years.
All right.
2020 to this year till 2026, he is straight up on the books. 42, 46, 49. The last year, 53 million.
At age what? 37.
Is
So you're paying Kevin Durant, assuming he hasn't asked out by then, you're paying Kevin Durant $53 million as a 37-year-old versus, even if you max out Jaylen, I don't know what you're paying him, 40 million or something like that. You're paying him that money at what, 28, 29, like 30. I mean, the point is he's in his prime. Like of course you pay him that, assuming he does want to stay, which is sort of the great unknown. But if you believe in a guy that posts on social media with purpose, I don't think it's hard to, if I'm not sort of misreading it, because I know he likes to say, like, the SMH, or I don't even know if he ever addressed that personally, but like, this didn't have to do with that, or like the energy's about to shift didn't have to do with that, even though he later admitted it did. But I mean, he's posting pictures right now out there in the community in his juice brand. He's with, Mayor Wu, and he's talking about how much, I love the community loves me. Like all this, like, I think that matters. I think that means something. I don't think that's subtle on his part.
No. And I talked to somebody who was close to him probably about a month ago now, after the SMH tweet. And they said, look, he loves being where he is, he's not going to talk about an extension now, but
sure.
He loves where he is. He wants to be in Boston. And this is somebody, pretty close, who knew what they were talking about. He doesn't want to go anywhere. This stuff about wanting to be his own number one somewhere, I'm not sure. Where did that come from?
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know. I don't know enough about him, I guess, but some of these guys just, and when I say that, I mean, like, professional athletes, let's focus it on basketball, obviously, because that seems to be the sport more than any other that we talk about being the number one, obviously. Some of these guys, like, what's more important? You want to be a number one and lose, like, in a place where you're like maybe going to be the 7-8 seed or something like that, but you're not really going to do anything, or you want to be a number two on a championship caliber team.
Right.
I don't know. Everybody's different. Some guys would rather be the one. Others, and I think Jaylen falls into the latter category, they want to win. That matters first and foremost. And let's not forget, this is also a guy that, had they won the championship this past year, he likely would have been finals MVP.
Right.
That was my final point. What says he can't be a one in the most important games that you can play? Like that, and that's all what being a competitor is all about, right? It's all about winning as many games as possible and hoisting the trophy at the end. And again, if the C's were able to manage to win game 4 and then, go on to win the title, Jaylen's hosting the Bill Russell MVP trophy, no question about it.
And where he is, he feels like he's 2 games away still.
Mm-hmm.
They think they're going to be right back there. Why would you want to change your situation over
right
like that?
I do want to point out that, and Mark brought it up for a second, and I was going to bring this up later, but I do think this is actually like kind of important. Jaylen being at that Roxbury basketball tournament is kind of a huge deal, in my opinion. I guess I'm not maybe the person to have this conversation, and I would like to have this conversation with some people that would know better than I do. But I think it's important that Jaylen is part of this movement that celebrates Black culture in Boston. Because oftentimes Boston is a victim of its past and present. It's not like I'm claiming that Boston is not a racist city. We hear it all the time. But one of the things that we don't do is prop up how important the Black culture is to Boston. And that tournament is a great way to do that. And have Jaylen Brown there is a great way to get more eyes like mine, like Adams, like Mark's onto that tournament. In my opinion, that's a really big deal. And I really love the fact that Jaylen is doing stuff like that. I wish, Tatum, I know he's got his own thing going on, but I wish like Tatum would show up to that too. That would be kind of a big deal. And I think it can't be lost on the fans that Jaylen does that. It can't be lost on people that Jaylen goes to those things. That's very important. And I think it's cool and awesome that Jaylen was able to pop through and just hang out for a while. I wasn't there. I'm on the other side of the state. So, what happens out in Boston half the time, I don't even hear about. But I did see that. And I think it'd be great if more guys took that responsibility and kind of ran with that. And again, it's important for the culture of Boston and for Jaylen Brown's involvement in it. I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, on that issue, I'll just say this. When we have these conversations about trades, potential trades, I personally am always looking at it from the scope of purely basketball. Because if I were to bring aspects like what Evan just brought up into play, and I agree with every word that he just said, if I were to bring those aspects into play, how many years, literally years, have we been saying the things that Jaylen Brown accomplishes off the basketball court over the course of his life are going to so far exceed whatever he does on the basketball court?
Sure.
If I were to just, dial in on that, we wouldn't even be having the conversation. Like you never want to trade away a guy of the caliber of Jaylen Brown. But, obviously when again, you just come back purely to basketball, that's when all this debate comes in.
Right. No, I mean, his rookie year, he addressed the Harvard School of Education. Intellectually, he's just
he's a VP with the
ahead
Players
of everybody. Yeah, he's a former, he's a future Players Association president for sure.
Oh, it might be a future senator,
Yeah.
I'll Bill Bradley.
Yeah.
Or a mayor like Kevin Johnson, or you name it. Like, I mean, if he wants to go into politics, he'll be very successful at it.
Oh, that march he led after George Floyd.
Yeah, him and Brogdon on the same team.
Yeah, at the MLK Center.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Which is a sort of a unique but appropriate way to transition quickly into this. We'll get into some of the schedule stuff, but one thing the Celtics, the entire NBA, haven't mentioned it, retiring Bill Russell's number 6 league-wide, except for obviously the players like LeBron who are grandfathered in, or, reminds me of like Mo Vaughn still wearing 42 after Major League Baseball retired Jackie Robinson's number. The celebrations are going to be endless, as they should be, for Bill Russell over the course of this coming season. What will be the 76th in NBA history, but the Celtics will be wearing, and I don't usually love all the City Connect jerseys, and I think a lot of that stuff, or City jerseys, City Connect in baseball, I think it's just City in the NBA. I tend to think a lot of those, especially like the gray ones, are really ugly, but I'm very excited that the Celtics are going to wear the old school Bill Russell themed Celtics jerseys a dozen times this year. I think maybe even opening night as well. I don't remember, but they're going to wear it a dozen times, 6 home, 6 road this coming season, among the celebrations, including obviously the Russell patch that they'll have. And that's great. Like I'm really looking forward to that stuff.
Oh, do a whole season of that.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, you know how many jerseys they're going to sell?
Yeah.
Stuff that.
Yeah.
It's, but
just because they wear their home whites more. They don't wear the home whites enough. It's drives me crazy.
Right. I gotta say the black and green grew on me.
Yeah, I've always liked the black and green. Those started back in the new Big Three era, right? Like those were I don't know if they were the first year, maybe the second year of Garnett and Allen and all those guys being here. But I have one of those in my closet. I love that jersey. The schedule stuff. So opening night, Philadelphia, a contender certainly. It's October 18th, a Christmas Day game, also at the Garden against Milwaukee. So you got a playoff rematch. You'll have finals rematches with the Warriors in December and January, middle of both those months. The There's a 7-game homestand, which I think I saw Mark D'Amico tweet is the longest homestand the Celtics have had since like 1980. There's obviously cutting down on travel and days off and all that stuff over the course of the year to kind of make the season a little more compact. You're going to have back-to-backs, a whole bunch of them. A 6-game trip in December, which is just a freaking gauntlet. Brooklyn and Toronto and Phoenix, Golden State, and both LA teams. That is your 6-game trip. And really just in a broader scope, really from like Thanksgiving through New Year's, that month and a half or whatever it is, a little more than a month is going to be pretty crazy and could in many ways define a season. So something to watch for when we get closer. And 37, I think Grandy tweeted this, 37 of the 82 regular season games as of right now, never mind what, could happen. 37 of the 82, almost half, are going to be primetime games. So yes, as if there was ever any doubt, Mark, the Celtics are very much on the map.
Yep, and be prepared for a lot of late starts. That's going to be...
You had to bring me down. I was on a high. You had to bring me right down.
Just start the game when you're going to start the game.
I work mornings, people. Christ.
The thing that gets me is that December trip, because it starts with a home road back-to-back against Brooklyn. What is it, Toronto or Philly?
It's Brooklyn. Toronto.
Brooklyn. Yeah. So, and then they shoot them out to Phoenix. That's kind of a tough way to start a trip like that.
Yeah, and the Phoenix game's the 3rd game in 4 nights, which is really tough. Like if you look at a lot of their back-to-backs, a lot of them are like that 3rd game in 4 nights thing, which drives me crazy. That'll be tough. That stretch I have highlighted on my, I have the physical printed out calendar. Like
he's gonna hang that on the wall in a frame right behind all those diplomas.
Right.
I put one of those on my fridge for my wife every year.
There you go. See, that's
just in case you're looking for me, hon. This is where I'm gonna be.
The one thing that stood out to me, besides that trip, which I have bracketed, is the end of the season.
Right.
They finish up March on a back-to-back, unfortunately, against Milwaukee, and Utah's at home. So they're going to go on the road at Milwaukee on the 30th of March, then have Utah at home on the 31st. But they're basically just home the rest of the way. They have Utah at home, a day off, a couple days off, and they go to Philly, which is not far. Then back home for Toronto, a day off, a game against Toronto at home again, and they get Atlanta at home. So as they ease into the postseason, they're not going to have to do a lot of traveling, which is going to be really kind of ginormous. Like the last faraway place they traveled to is Sacramento on March 21st. Then they have Indiana at home, Spurs at home, at Washington, at Milwaukee, Utah at home, Philly on the road, Toronto at home, Atlanta at home. So, at the end of the year when everybody's tired, they're not going to do a lot of traveling, which is just a nice way to handle that, I think. So
I'll add to that with this. At least we're going to give you all the boring schedule details. We'll give you some meaty information behind it. And I know Evan has some stats as well. But I saw this from Matt Moore, our buddy over at the Action Network, who comes on, joins us from time to time. He did this for every team, not just the Celtics. Tweeted out, last 20 games, last quarter of the season, and what the schedule looks like for all these clubs. And here's what he wrote on the Celtics. For their final 20, 10th easiest schedule in the league, based on obviously last year's records, 10 home, 10 away. So you got a 50-50 split, sort of part of what Evan was just talking about. Only 4 back-to-backs, or if you want to say only, but 4 back-to-backs. And he writes, Houston, San Antonio, and Utah twice in March are pretty much already wins.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll see if Mitchell's on the team. We'll find out.
Right. Yeah, and that's, him to the Knicks is seeming more and more likely versus Kevin Durant to anywhere seeming less and less likely, obviously. But Evan, I know you would look some stuff up as well.
Yeah, I gotta get a shout out here because I'm gonna say this wrong. It's Ed Kupfer, Kupfer, but there's those the umlaut, the 2 little dots over the U. I'm probably saying that wrong. I apologize, but it's EDKUPFER with some interesting statistics here and data sets for us. The big one to me, Ed has up here the number of games when the team has more rest days than their opponent. So the Celtics would have more rest than their opponent coming in or wherever they're playing. And and unfortunately, Boston's in the bottom 5 of that. So most of the time, they're either going to play a team on equal rest, which happens to Boston the 5th most, or they're going to play a team that has more rest than they do. So that's really not ideal. You want, obviously not everything's going to line up in your direction here. But that's one of the ways in which it's not lining up for Boston in any particular good way. And then he also did a bit on strength of schedule, and Boston's basically, so he tweets out NBA 2023's schedule for each team broken into 4 time periods. Highest numbers equal easier schedule. Teams at the bottom of the toughest schedules. Well, Boston is at the top line of their schedule. They have an easier-ish schedule, and it's pretty consistent all the way through. It's not like, I don't know if you remember last year, guys, where Boston had a really tough part of their schedule, I think in December last year.
It was December last year.
Yeah, where it was really tough, and then things got a lot, and they had a tough stretch in that particular part, and things kind of eased up. They don't really have, I mean, they have some gauntlets here. You can't go a whole season without it. Like, I'm looking at this particular stretch in November where you think it's not going to be that bad, but for some reason, Detroit gave them a problem last year, and they played Detroit twice in 4 nights. So there's always stuff like that. But it doesn't seem like the Phoenix, Golden State, Toronto, Clippers, like that's pretty much as bad as it gets right there. You know, they go Milwaukee, they have Minnesota at home, the Christmas Day game with Milwaukee. And they get Houston, who's everybody's kind of like favorite up and coming team, but they're very young. I don't think they're ready for Boston yet. Then they have the Clippers and then Denver. Like that's a tough stretch there as you head into January, but then you get OKC as a warm-up game after that. You know, so there's December, January gets slightly dicey, but it doesn't, there's like not a stretch where you're like, oh my goodness, like what felt like last year, December was a mess. And maybe because they lost a ton of games and added to that anxiety. But I, you know, again, I'm like Larry Bird. Here's the schedule. There's 41 home, 41 away. Like that's, I don't really care. You got to play them all anyway. Like who cares? But you know, for the people out there that do care, there are certain stretches in here that are somewhat significant.
Did you ever think you'd use the phrase "I'm like Larry Bird"?
Yeah, Al, all the time. Kind of take, you know, like I'm tar in my driveway and running marathons, and then only scoring left-handed against a certain team, so I want to save my right hand for Magic.
Just showboating out there. Oh man, Mark, it's good to have you back here on the show with us.
Guys.
I'm hoping that, you know, and on the one hand, I hope we have something, you know, the royal we, all of us, you to report on or talk with us whenever you come back, or us doing this weekly. I hope we have something interesting to get into over the next, you know, month and a half, other than like, you know, is Peyton Pritchard still part of the rotation, things like that. But by the same token, I don't need the world shook. I don't need Kevin Durant here.
No, I think you'll be pretty quiet. I think you'll get your wish.
Yeah.
I think Brooklyn's goal is to see what they've actually got.
Well, Evan, you're probably gonna, you know, Evan, for anyone who doesn't know, comes up with the show titles for you know, all of our various places you can download this podcast. We probably don't want to go with like, you know, Mark, Evan, and Adam break down the schedule. I don't think that'll get any clicks. Maybe it's just, maybe this week it's like, you know, do the Celtics even want Kevin Durant?
Well, we've done that. I think we've already kind of like done that.
Yeah, that's true.
I know we've talked about it enough. The one thing I'll say that I think is kind of interesting is watching, and Mark, I think Mark saw this because I think he liked it on Twitter for me. But there's like this gradual step, this like, I'd say like slope of coolness that Tatum is currently climbing.
Oh, right.
The fact that he's hanging out in elite circles should be encouraging.
He's partying with Jay-Z and Kevin Hart.
Right. He's doing that. He's at Draymond's wedding.
With Steph and LeBron and all these guys in the, talk about a tampering session.
Right. He's in the picture with like, it's LeBron, Steph, Draymond, Rich Paul.
Well, his dad was in.
Yeah, his dad was there.
Yeah.
His dad was taking the selfie of the group.
I love it. There's that going on. He's training with Durant in the offseason. Like, if you wanted any, and again, I've been saying this since the season's over, and I got into some like, Tatum is the way. Tatum's the future. People, please understand this, because everybody else around him is starting to realize that Tatum is the real deal here. And like my hot take to be prescient for the next season, I was thinking about it. Tatum will lead the team in assists in 2022, 2023.
Oh, I like that.
Is my hot take. I am just sticking to this bandwagon, or this hot take of
you're big on the point Tatum.
Point Tatum is the way, and I just don't understand how people don't see that. And once he leads the team in assists, we're no longer going to have to worry about it. And I think this is the year he does. And I love. It's not going to be Brogdon. It's not going to be Marcus.
Well, Brogdon's going to be coming off the bench.
That's why. It's not going to be White. It's going to be Tatum.
I want to look up what last year looked like real quick before we do sign off.
Yeah.
So Smart was first at 5.9, no surprise. But Tatum was second, 4.4.
Doesn't have to do that much. Just telling you right now. And we've already seen it in the highest setting. Did it go well all the time? No, but that's okay. Go back to game 1. He had 13 assists in that game in the NBA Finals. So he can do it. My take is he's going to lead the team in assists, and you can go further. Jaylen will end up like 3rd or 4th, but Jaylen's getting there too.
But Tatum's next step is going to be breaking down double teams better. I mean, that's going to be part of it.
That's it.
Yep. Good stuff. We'll do it again next week. This is a fun show. I enjoy it always. For Evan, for Mark, obviously, I am Adam. Rate, review, subscribe. I said it off the top for a rare occasion, and I mean it even more now. So please do. Thanks for joining us on.